The night my daughter-in-law screamed at me to get out of my own house, I didn't say a word. I just stood there, in the hallway I had paid to build, next to the staircase I had paid to renovate, and I looked at her. She thought my silence was weakness. She was wrong. My name is George Callahan. I'm 67 years old. I spent 41 years running a small commercial plumbing supply company in Dayton, Ohio. Not glamorous, not the kind of thing that gets you on magazine covers. But it was honest work, and it built something real. A warehouse, a client list, a retirement account that took decades of careful decisions to grow, and a house, a 4-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Drive that I bought in 1991 and paid off by 2009. My wife Irene passed in 2017. Pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who kept a tin of homemade cookies on the kitchen counter, and who always told me that our son, Adam, had her eyes and my stubbornness. She wasn't wrong about either. After she was gone, the house felt wrong, too quiet. I'd walk through it at night and feel the absence of her more than the presence of anything else. So when Adam suggested that he and his wife, Stacy, and their 2 kids move in, just temporarily, he said, while they got back on their feet after the move from Cincinnati, I said yes. Of course I said yes. It was family. It was the house his mother had raised him in, and I'll be honest, I was lonely. That was the first mistake, not saying yes. That part was fine. The mistake was not being clear about what the arrangement actually meant. Adam was 34 at the time. He worked in logistics management for a trucking company. Stacy did some part-time bookkeeping work remotely, though I noticed early on that she treated it more like an optional activity than a job. They had 2 children, Dylan, who was 9, and Mia, who was 7. Good kids, both of them. Polite. They'd come find me in the garage on Saturday mornings and watch me work on the old Silverado I'd been restoring since before Irene got sick. I want to be clear about something. I was not a demanding landlord. I was not a difficult father-in-law. I asked for very little. I had dinner with them most nights. I kept to myself otherwise. I didn't comment on the way they spent their money, even when I noticed things that made me uneasy. And there were things. Within 3 months of them moving in, Stacy had redecorated the living room. She didn't ask. She didn't mention it was happening. I came home from the hardware store one Saturday to find my wife's china cabinet moved to the garage and a new sectional sofa in its place. A sectional that, I later found out, they put on a credit card they didn't have the balance to cover. I didn't say anything about the china cabinet. I moved it back inside quietly and put it in the dining room. But I filed that moment away. 6 months in, Adam came to me about money for the first time. His car needed a transmission replacement. $2,200. He'd pay me back by the end of the quarter, he said. He sounded confident when he said it. I wrote him a check. The end of that quarter came and went. I didn't bring it up. I kept thinking he would. He didn't. 8 months in, Stacy asked if I could cover Dylan's travel baseball registration, $450. She framed it as something she was embarrassed to ask, but the embarrassment didn't last long enough to prevent her from asking for the credit card number. I gave it to her because Dylan loved baseball and I loved Dylan. But I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic. Just a small notebook I kept in the desk in my bedroom. Dates, amounts, what it was for. A year in, the balance in that notebook was over $9,000. None of it paid back. None of it even mentioned. I also started noticing how they talked about the house. Not consciously at first, but then in a way I couldn't unnotice once I'd seen it. Adam would tell people they lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in a nice part of Dayton. Not that they lived with his father. Not that it was my house. Just that this was where they lived. Stacy once told her sister over the phone, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen, that she didn't love the neighborhood and would probably want something farther east eventually. Something farther east, from my house. The real shift happened in the 2nd year. It was gradual, the way these things always are. A comment here, a look there. A door closed when I walked down the hall toward the living room. Stacy stopped including me in dinner plans on weekends. Adam started responding to my questions with the kind of short answers that were technically replies but felt like doors shutting in my face. I want to be fair. I think some of it was their marriage. They weren't happy, and that unhappiness had to go somewhere, but the direction it went was toward me. By the 3rd year, I had become, in my own house, something between a ghost and an inconvenience. I would hear Stacy on the phone with her friends complaining about not having enough space. I watched her rearrange the kitchen cabinets without asking, moving things I'd kept in the same place for 20 years. When I mentioned it once, gently, I thought, she looked at me like I had said something unreasonable. Adam was sitting at the kitchen table when it happened. He said nothing. That silence. I still think about that silence. The money continued to move in one direction. A kitchen repair. A new laptop for Adam. School clothes for the kids, which I was glad to help with, but which were always mixed in with other items I hadn't agreed to. One evening, I went to use my credit card at the pharmacy, and it was declined. I called the bank from the parking lot and found out the card was $200 over its limit. I didn't share that card with anyone, but I'd given the number to Stacy for Dylan's baseball fees 17 months earlier, and she'd apparently kept it. I called Adam that night. He apologized. Said it was a mistake. Said Stacy had thought it was a shared household card. I don't know if he believed that when he said it, or if he was just hoping I would. I paid off the balance. I canceled the card. I didn't say much else, but I started making calls. I called my accountant first. Then my attorney, a woman named Patricia Weston, who had handled my business affairs for over 15 years. I told her I wanted to understand my options. She asked me what I was thinking about. I told her I wasn't sure yet, but that I wanted to understand what the house situation would look like if I decided to make changes. She asked me one question. Is your name the only name on the deed? I said yes. She said, then you have more options than you might think. I didn't do anything immediately. I kept watching. I kept writing in the notebook. And I kept being the kind of father-in-law who showed up at Dylan's Saturday morning games with a lawn chair and a cup of coffee and cheered louder than most of the parents half my age. The breaking point when it finally came was not dramatic the way you might expect. It was a Tuesday evening in March. I had been dealing with a cold for 4 or 5 days, and I came downstairs around 6:30 to make myself some soup. Stacy was in the kitchen on her laptop. I excused myself, started heating up the broth, and mentioned that I might call the doctor in the morning if I wasn't feeling better. She didn't look up from the screen. She said, "You've been moping around this house for a week. It's making everything feel heavy." I stood at the stove with my back to her for a moment. Then I turned around and asked her quietly what she meant by that. She looked up then, and she said, with a kind of irritated calm that was worse than anger would have been, "I mean that this is our home too, and we deserve to live in it without feeling like we're walking on eggshells around you. Our home." Adam walked in from the garage at that exact moment. He heard what she'd said. He saw my face, and he said, "She's got a point, Dad." That was it. That was the sentence. Not the rudeness, not the credit card, not the $9,000, not 3 years of invisibility in my own house. It was those 5 words, delivered with the particular ease of someone who has decided that their comfort matters more than your dignity. "He's got a point, Dad." I went back upstairs. I finished my soup up there. And that night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat at my desk, and I opened that notebook, and I read through every entry from the beginning, every dollar, every date, every small thing I had swallowed to keep the peace. The total by then was over $23,000. I called Patricia Weston the next morning. I want to be careful here, because what I did next took time, and it took intention, and I don't want to make it sound simpler than it was. I was not acting out of anger. Or at least, anger was not the only thing driving me. There was something else. A kind of quiet clarity that I hadn't felt in years, like a long fog finally lifting. Patricia helped me understand the steps. Since my name was the only name on the deed to the house, and I had no legal agreement with Adam and Stacy about tenancy, we'd never signed a lease, never formalized anything. They were guests. Long-term guests with complicated emotions attached, but guests nonetheless. In the state of Ohio, there were proper procedures for reclaiming the property, but I didn't want to file formal eviction papers. Not because I was afraid of the process, but because I wanted to handle it the way I had handled most things in my life. Carefully and completely. So I made a plan. First, I put the house on the market. I didn't tell Adam and Stacy. I worked with a realtor I'd known for years, a quiet man who understood discretion. We listed it as available with a 60-day close window. The market in that part of Dayton had been solid, and we had an offer in 11 days. While that was moving forward, I started preparing my exit. I had a storage unit rented across town. Over the course of 3 weeks, I moved the things that mattered to me. Irene's china cabinet, the photographs, my father's tools, the Silverado, which I drove to a friend's property on the east side of town where it had more room than the garage anyway. I found myself an apartment. A two-bedroom on the third floor of a building near the river that I had always liked the look of from the outside. Quiet building. Secure. Nice view. I signed the lease on a Thursday afternoon and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't even realized was tight. I also, with Patricia's guidance, drafted a formal letter to Adam and Stacy, not hostile, not gloating, simply clear. It stated that the property at Birchwood Drive was under contract to sell, that the expected close date was approximately 45 days from the date of the letter, and that they would need to arrange alternative housing by that date. It included information about their rights during that transition period and a reference to Ohio tenant law so they could verify everything themselves. I had Patricia send it certified mail, and then I hand-delivered a copy through the front door of my own house at 7 in the morning before Adam had left for work. I was not there for the reaction. I did not want to be there for the reaction. I had already moved most of what I needed. I drove to the diner on 5th Street and had eggs and coffee and read the newspaper, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like myself. Adam called 11 times that morning. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages started confused and moved quickly to angry and then to something that I can only describe as panicked. Stacy called once and left a voicemail that was mostly just breathing, and then a very quiet, very cold, "You can't do this." I could. I was. He came to the diner. I don't know how he found me. I'd been going there for 30 years, so it wasn't a great mystery. He sat down across from me, and I noticed he hadn't shaved, which was unusual for him on a workday. He looked like he'd been awake since the letter arrived. I let him talk. He talked for a long time. He said I was being cruel. He said I had blindsided them. He said the kids needed stability. He said he couldn't believe I was doing this over a few disagreements. He used the word family 7 or 8 times. I waited until he was done. Then I said, "Adam, the house is sold. The close date is in the letter. I have paid for your housing for 3 years. I have covered over $23,000 in expenses that were never repaid. I am 67 years old, and I am not going to spend the remaining years of my life feeling like a stranger in the house I built. This is done." He said, "Where are we supposed to go?" I said, "I don't know. That's something you and Stacy are going to have to figure out together." He left without finishing his coffee. What I want to say here, because this is the part I've thought about the most since, is that the hardest part wasn't the practical stuff. It wasn't the sale or the apartment or the letter. The hardest part was Dylan and Mia. I called my son 2 days after the diner conversation, and I told him that whatever happened between him and me and Stacy, I expected to still see my grandchildren. I told him I had set up accounts for both kids. College savings accounts, modest but real, that Stacy's name was not on, and that I would continue contributing to regardless of what happened between the adults. I told him that if he decided to keep me away from Dylan and Mia out of spite, that was his choice. But he should understand it would be the cruelest thing he could do, and I would not forget it. He didn't respond right away. But 3 weeks later, Dylan called me from his own phone. Adam had gotten him a cell phone, apparently, and asked if I was coming to his game on Saturday. I went. I sat in my same lawn chair. I brought the same coffee. Dylan hit a double in the 3rd inning, and turned around to find me in the stands before he even looked for his parents. That was enough. That was more than enough. The house closed on a Thursday in early May. I was not present at closing because I didn't need to be. Patricia handled the paperwork. The number that came back to my account was, after realtor fees and the remaining carrying costs, just over $410,000. That money went into a CD ladder and a conservative investment account that my financial advisor had recommended, and it will be part of what I leave behind someday. Part of it, Patricia helped me structure, went into an irrevocable trust for Dylan and Mia that neither Adam nor Stacy can touch. I've lived in the apartment for 8 months now. I wake up without dread. I drink my coffee by the window. I have a neighbor on the 2nd floor, a retired teacher named Arthur, who knocks on my door sometimes on Sunday mornings to see if I want to walk down to the farmer's market. I go when I feel like it, and I don't when I don't. I learned something, living through all of this, that I want to say plainly. Generosity has to have limits, not because people are bad, but because some people will interpret limitless generosity as limitless obligation. My son never learned to separate what I gave him from what he was owed. I think that's partly my failure as a father. I made things too easy for too long and called it love, when what love actually required was some friction and some expectation. I don't know where Adam and Stacy are living now. I heard through a cousin that they're renting an apartment on the west side. I hope it's fine. I hope they're managing. I don't wish them harm. I just don't center my life around their well-being anymore, and that is a change I should have made years earlier. What I do know is this. The morning I moved the last box out of Birchwood Drive, I stood in the empty living room for a few minutes. The walls still had the marks where Irene's pictures had hung. The kitchen still had the faint smell of 30 years of Sunday cooking. I said goodbye to it, quietly, to her, and then I walked out the front door and locked it behind me for the last time. I drove to the apartment. I put on a pot of coffee. I sat by the window and watched the river, and I thought, this is mine, all of it. The quiet, the morning light, the years I have left. Nobody gets to take that from me again.